Muito antes de Stranger Things, Banshee Chapter trazia para os fãs de conspirações os relatos obscuros dos experimentos do projeto MKUltra, conduzido pela CIA durante a Guerra Fria. Com o objetivo de controlar a mente humana, a CIA conduziu diversos experimentos ultra-secretos que envolviam, entre outras coisas, a administração de drogas, como LSD, de maneira indiscriminada em cobaias humanas. O que antes era apenas uma teoria da conspiração, foi confirmado em meados dos anos 70, quando o Congresso americano conduziu uma investigação das atividades da CIA. Na época, o então diretor da CIA, Richard Helms, ordenou a destruição de todos os dados e arquivos ligados ao MKUltra. No entanto, mesmo após o ano 2000, muitos documentos ainda vêm sendo encontrados, e existem até hoje ex-veteranos da CIA que afirmam que a pesquisa em si nunca foi abandonada. No vídeo de hoje, vou bater um papo com Blair Erickson, diretor do filme Banshee Chapter, que abordou este e outros mistérios de maneira ímpar. Hello everyone, welcome to Area 43. Today we have Blair Erickson, the director of Banshee Chapter, here with us to chat a little bit about the movie and the future projects that he's working on. So welcome, Blair. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation to
Alejandro, thank you for having me on. I am excited to talk with you more about Brazil. I love, going down there for Fanespo and meeting you and all the people down there. It was one of the best film fest experiences I think we've ever had. So it's great to talk.
Oh, thank you. It was actually a while ago, but your movies is still, on the top of the rank. I really love that. I haven't not seen many movies that talked about the same subject in the same good way that you brought it to us, in a way that it's kind of mysterious and, you have not opened fully the door, so, and I like what Stephen King says once that, what keeps you scared is what you're not showing, because it's on your imagination, right? So I'd like just to ask you some questions about the Banshee Chapter. And first of all, the script is amazing. You have the way that you tie together CIA conspiracy and something that actually happened with this H.P. Lovecraft story. So can you tell us a little bit more about how this came to life?
Sure. So I think it started with I was really a fan of both horror and a lot of the counterculture writers of like the mid 20th century United States, where you guys like Ken Kesey, Hunter S. Thompson, Timothy Leary, people like that. I was sort of just fascinated by these personas. And I also had become familiar with a couple of things like, some of the MK Ultra experiments that the United States military and CIA had worked in. And what was surprising about that, so this was a while back, where people didn't know at the time or didn't realize how true the conspiracy stories were. It wasn't just a fantasy. It wasn't just something invented. There was real substance to the accusations, and there were many victims. So I got, very interested in this story. And the H.P. Lovecraft element really came from that story From Beyond, where it was about, a scientist who creates a device that can peer into other dimensions. And in this case, I thought, okay, well, what if instead of a mechanical device, this was a chemical device and it activated something in the pineal gland and it sort of opened this gateway. So that became, I think, the first step of it. And then I think it just kind of took off from there, interweaving the H.P. Lovecraft fiction into a true life, conspiracy story.
Right, and also about how you brought this to life, like some sort of, not exactly a found footage, but with elements of a found footage movie, and also it's very realistic, the look and feel, you actually feel you're inside the movie. So how did you get to that? What was your intention for going there?
We were walking a fine line, trying not to, I didn't want to do a found footage where it's like, oh, okay, there's someone here and that's what you're going to see and that's it. We wanted to have the freedom as a filmmaker to really show what you want to show. But, Alphonse Cuarón does a lot of those nice long takes that you see in his films, like, Children of Men and Gravity and stuff like that. And they're very immersive. And that drew me in a lot, where I wanted to make something that felt that kind of immersion. And the other thing that was happening at the time was, as digital cameras were becoming more and more available, I was testing and finding that you could shoot in natural low light, which is something that cinema didn't really do. Most of the time they have that bright Hollywood blue light that shines and illuminates them nicely to say, okay, this is what night is supposed to be. But it doesn't look anything like what night looks like when you're actually seeing it. So with this, our cinematographer, Jeremy Oberton, was looking at how could we shoot with as little light as possible to really match what darkness looks like and to create that feeling of, truth to it that is missing in a lot of horror stories. And I think it was also about, you wanted it to feel documentary style enough that the long takes and the immersion and the natural light would all kind of blend together to feel so real that when the really scary stuff starts happening, it feels like this is something you're really experiencing. It's not just a Hollywood interpretation of it. So that was a lot of the idea behind the filmmaking.
I've seen that you also tie together something else that's still a mystery, and there's a lot of videos about it, which is the number stations. Most of the people say they don't know exactly what they're used for. Some of these number stations are, if not most of them, are still running and broadcasting messages that no one seems to know what's that for and what it means. And how did you get the idea to mix that up with this MK Ultra experience?
Okay, so I would really have to go through all the crazy shit that we researched to really get in there, because I had a co-writer, Dan Healy. I had producers that we were putting together which ideas were the right ideas to make this the scariest story possible. So the number stations was something I had been following for years, and I had followed, I think it's pronounced the Conant Project, and I just was obsessed. Like, what are these sounds? Are they really, from the CIA? Are they from, other governments, whatever? And this is a story. I'm going to tell you this story. And when I tell the story, I preface this by saying, this is going to sound like total bullshit. The story I'm about to tell you is going to sound completely made up, but it is true. I swear to it, and I have the photographs to back it up. But when we were doing the test footage, so, you have this period where you're taking it to shop to the, film investors, so to speak, and the distributor or whoever, and you're going to show them something of this is what it's going to feel like, or maybe this is the first scene of the movie. There was originally an opening scene. It didn't end up making the final cut, but it was very creepy, very scary, different kind of opening scene with the same two characters, but something else different happened out in the woods with a van. And we had the number stations. So we were scouting locations to shoot this, and we were going very deep into the Purisma Nature Preserve, I think, in Northern California. And it's this huge redwood forest, ferns everywhere, really deep, lush, foggy, you can barely see, but it's beautiful. And this is where we were scouting to shoot the scene. And as we were going deep in the forest, I was there with one other person, and we started hearing a number station in the air. You started to, just like in the movie, that clicking, hissing, and then the tunes. And I'm sitting there with this person, they've read the script, and I'm looking at them like, we're these people in the horror movie where it's like, do we go investigate the strange noise? Like, I mean, in the movie, when the people do that, I'm like, what are you doing? You're so stupid. But we're standing out there, I'm hearing this, and I'm like, I have to know. I have to know where it's coming from, and I'm going to go investigate. So we went over the edge of the side of the cliff, and we went down, and it was deep into a ravine. And there was this wooden table with a shortwave radio on it, and these two unusual looking older men sitting at the table listening to it. And I went up and I just started talking to them, and the story that they told me, and I don't know if it's true or not, but one was ex-NSA, and they were hobbyists, so to speak, who had done this in a work profession before, but the spot that we were in happened to be one of the good locations for picking up the signals bouncing off the stratosphere from the shortwave radio broadcasts. So, because it was an open space and it was away from, I guess, all the electronics of the cities around. And I told them, what we were doing, and we took a picture, and it ended up becoming a little bit integrated into the scene in the movie where she goes to the TV shop. So I kind of used some of the stuff that happened when we were out there, and talking with the guys, what I picked up from them. So yeah, that sort of was a very long explanation to say that the number stations were always at the core of it, just because I was fascinated by them and the stories behind them. And I think even to this day, no one has ever really officially taken credit for, what government or agency or group is behind them. And I'm sure there's many, but we don't really have a clear answer yet. So I think that's one of the fun mysteries of the film that I like to explore.
So, and what about the Swedish Rhapsody? Was there any specific reason why you chose that one just because it's creepy enough, or
it's beautiful and disturbing, and everything about it is right but wrong. You know what I mean? Like, the tune is just so catchy. You can never get it out of your head.
Is there anything, by the time, was there anything else that you wanted to put inside of the movie and that you couldn't because of budget or some other kind of constraints, and that you regret? Like, I wish I had put this on the movie.
I don't think there's too much like that. We went back and did reshoots when we needed to, when there was an effect that I wasn't happy with. Sometimes I would just end up doing the effect myself on my computer and rendering it out differently and then I'd send it back to the team and say, okay, this is what I want to try here. Or I'd hand paint the frames in like I needed them to be. Because I had a lot of background on that side, that was, I didn't feel too boxed in. There's always, I think, when you finish shooting, you have a tight schedule on a low budget film like this, you always feel like, oh, if only we got more takes of this or that, or more coverage of this, or maybe we had tried a camera movement like that, that would have even been more effective. But I don't feel too much like there was anything missing from the movie. There was stuff that we actually had to cut. We didn't have time for. There was actually some great performances, I thought, that we had to cut just because it was, okay, it was too much. We needed to get the story moving faster in that point. I think the original cut was probably 2 hours and 15. And I think the final cut was like 1 hour 45. So it was about 45 that was taken out of the movie. That was more background, more character development, things like that, which I personally love and I have the attention span for, but I also know a lot of audiences get very restless with movies. I think if there was a series version of this, I think it would probably be Stranger Things. I have a feeling they watched our film to get some ideas because there were way too many overlaps as far as Patient 11, MK Ultra, and the interdimensional beings that are coming through from everything. I was like, did they? But they borrowed from a lot, so it's just an honor to be in the possible things that they borrowed from. I think you look at Stranger Things, which has 8 hours to talk about MK Ultra, and they can do a lot more. I think films are kind of a little bit on the way out as far as their cultural dominance and their relevance. I think movies are sort of becoming short stories to books, which are TV series. TV series act like books where they really have the time to get into all the background and the character history and the character development. And then I think that's a weakness that cinema has. As far as like what we would have had in our story, there was definitely some stuff. So first of all, this is a real creepy one. I listened to the Jonestown tapes. I happen to live in the district where one of the Jonestown survivors had become the congressional rep. She was there. The congressman in our district was killed. She replaced him. But there was stuff in that tapes when you got to the end and everybody was dying or dead that sounded a hell of a lot like the number stations. And this is not really in the film, but when I dug into who was in MK Ultra, now you can find this series on Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was part of MK Ultra. At the time, that was a question mark. Now we know it was fact, he was. There were questions of whether Jim Jones in Jonestown was part of the MK Ultra program. There was evidence that he was. A lot of those very strange, crazy dudes in the late 20th century, a lot of them were. Ted Kaczynski, potentially Jim Jones, I believe. So Charles Manson was maybe in MK Ultra. But that would have been stuff I would have brought in. Some of these cult leaders and murderers who were also part of the program, I would have brought that in. I would have brought in some of those elements. And I think when you look at the Thomas Blackburn character as being a counterculture mid-20th century type figure like that, that absolutely would have come into play. And Thomas Blackburn, a lot of people say, oh, that's clearly Hunter S. Thompson. Hunter S. Thompson, yes, he talks in some of those ways and he said some of those things, but the life story and what he did was very similar to Ken Kesey. Ken Kesey was part of the MK Ultra. He was given these drugs as part of the chemical experiments in MK Ultra. I believe he was at Stanford at the time. So he's a grad student. They do all these experiments on his brain with these chemicals. He comes out of there, and the first thing he does is start basically evangelizing these drugs to the public. And he starts pushing what they call the electric Kool-Aid acid test, which became his novel. He was also given the electroshock therapy, as you see in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which he wrote. So all of that shit happened to him for real in the program. Happened to Ted Kaczynski, it happened to a lot of these guys, and it definitely changed something about them. So was it successful? Was the MK Ultra program successful in doing mind control? Not necessarily, but was it successful in changing brains? Yes, they did do shit to people's brains that they never recovered from. I would have included a lot more of that. I would have gotten more into that program. I would have gotten more into that history. I would have gotten more into the potential other people who were in the program. I think we would have gotten to the Unabomber stuff. I think we would have gotten to the Jim Jones stuff. I think we would have looked at Charles Manson. I think all of that would have come in. But that's if you're doing it as a series. I think you have the time to do that. As a movie, there's only so many new ideas you can introduce to the audience. So at some point you have to say, sorry, that's too much information for the audience. We're cutting it. So we did a lot of cutting.
Have you ever considered working on a sequence or maybe on a TV series about that?
Yeah, there was a little bit of talk about that. Netflix was really happy with how the film did on Netflix. So we had talked a little bit to them about maybe doing something, but honestly, at the time I wasn't pitching a sequel. I was pitching something completely different. And maybe that was my mistake, but I wanted to just move on and do something new. I think had I done it, I think they probably would have been interested in that. But there was never a script or anything like that for a sequel.
What can we expect from you in the future? So are you working on any project, any big thing that's coming up?
I am. A very big thing we've been building, I say we because it's not just me, but I've been doing some code and some creative on a virtual reality experience that I think is going to knock people's socks off. Horror fans will probably dig it for sure. But I also think just people who are fans of fun experiences will like it. I think people should stay tuned because I'll be dropping information about that at some point. When the time is right and we're ready to present, this is something that's coming to the Quest and the Quest 2 and PlayStation VR 2. Not the first VR, which is not very good. There's also a game that I did that was briefly on the iOS top charts, and it was called Cinemagic. That's a game where you're thrown into a dimension where you have to save cinema from itself by battling all these endless sequels and reboots by making original ideas. And the game generates like posters and tells you like how it does with audiences. It's a very fun, casual kind of storytelling game.
Is there any specific message that you'd like to leave to the Brazilian viewers that are watching this now?
I do, actually. I do have a message. Brazilian viewers, this virtual reality experience we are building in Unreal Engine 4. If you have experience working in that engine, either as an artist or a developer who can do some code, specifically blueprints, hit me up on Discord. We've got some Brazilian people on our team. We've got a great international team, but I know there are people in Brazil who are very, very good with this tech. So we are always looking for more people because one of the biggest challenges right now is there are not enough qualified people to work in this. And, we've got a small team not because our budget's small, it's actually because there aren't enough qualified people who have worked in VR and worked with the headset or work with Unreal. So if you are one of those people out there, hit me up. There's definitely some stuff for you to do. So.
Great, Blair. So it was amazing talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate this talking, and this is going to be available on YouTube. I will send you the link once it's there. So again, thank you very much. And
thank you for having me. It's been great. Yeah, and this was wonderful. So if you ever want to have me back, I'm always open. I'd be happy to come back and plug our VR game in a couple months when it's out, and we can show it, and you can take a test drive of it.
Amazing. Thank you, Blair.
All right. Cheers. Have a good one.